Thank you. Ryan, thank you. Thank you for the level of care and intention you bring to this work. Our thanks to the staff here at the DC Public Library System, the staff of the DC Public Library Foundation, our friends at Politics and Prose, my Morehouse brothers who are in the room there and elsewhere, WABJ, of which Phil is the president, and my wife and son, my son's up there taking a picture, who have been the most patient partners in pursuit of this book. I got to tell you all, I am so happy to have this book finally out in the world. This is a 4-year-long effort. And as those of you, who's written a book before or is in the process? There you go. Scott Detrow has a book coming out in November 2026 called The American Pope. Scott Detrow, host of All Things Considered on NPR. Thank you for being here. When you meet with publishers and you pitch your book, you hope it goes well. And my meetings went well, but the first one was, we want to be in business with you. This was the response. We want to be in business with you, but why would you write a book like this? You cover national politics. Why don't you write a book about Joe Biden or Donald Trump? And the response was, my response was, there are enough of those books, and I know enough to know that when you write a book, it's the thing you think about when you wake up, as you know. It's the thing you fret about all day. It's the thing that's on your mind when you go to sleep. And our politics these days is all-consuming. And I didn't want to devote any more of my brain space to that. I wanted to answer this question that I had been kicking around in my head for the longest time, and it was this. How in the 1990s did you have all of these now iconic sitcoms on TV at the same time? The at the same time part of it is important because it meant that no one show had to bear the burden of representing the entirety of the black experience. I say that in air quotes because, of course, there is no one monolithic black experience. Instead, you had a different world. You had Martin, you had Living Single. Arsenio was the king of late night. If the ratings didn't bear that out, the culture certainly did. How did all of that happen? So I approached this really with the instincts of a journalist and the heart of a fan, and it was also an excuse to reach out to the people that I grew up watching, you grew up watching. And so this piece that we're going to show, I should also say, Darrell Bell wanted to be here, but Congress had other plans, and the Atlanta airport had other plans, but I didn't want to be accused of false advertising. So journalists doing what we do, we pivot, we adapt, and so I recorded a conversation with him that we'll play in a second. But first I want you to take a look at this piece we did for the NewsHour that really reflects the essence of the book, and it also mirrors the reporting process. Calling up folks you will know when you see them, and asking them what that was like, what that experience was like, and then taking those interviews and stitching them together in this book that you hold in your hands. So take a look.
Ladies and gentlemen, Keenan Ivory Wayans.
On a Sunday night in April of 1990, something quietly radical happened on American television. Fox aired the first episode of In Living Color.
Juvie, Juvie, Juvie!
A sketch comedy show created, written, and controlled by black artists.
Homie, don't play that.
It was a cultural shockwave that helped ignite a boom of black comedy on TV.
Max in the house.
When millions of Americans saw versions of themselves on screen that felt specific and true. Erica Alexander played Maxine Shaw on the Fox sitcom Living Single, about young black professionals navigating work, friendship, and dating in Brooklyn. The 90s were the golden age of black sitcoms. What did it feel like to exist inside that ecosystem?
It was amazing. It was amazing to be in that era. It felt like anything could be done and that we, in large measure, could start to achieve some of the things that in the 60s people said would happen.
But to understand how that door opened, you have to go back, all the way back. Because for decades, black comedy existed inside narrow limits, propping up America's first form of mass entertainment, minstrelsy. Comedians like Burt Williams became stars, even while navigating an industry that demanded black performers play degrading caricatures.
Mom, take it away.
Decades later, Moms Mabley mixed sharp social commentary with disarming warmth. In the 1960s, Dick Gregory carried stand-up directly into the civil rights movement.
Have you ever stopped to think that if all the Negroes left the South, buses would ride like this?
The Flip Wilson Show.
By the early 1970s, Flip Wilson broke new ground as the first black comedian to host a major network variety show.
You destroyed my whole image.
The damnedest thing I've ever heard of in my life.
Richard Pryor, whose approach was raw, fearless, and deeply personal, reshaped what comedy could do.
All the people you ever heard of freebasing, have you ever heard of anybody blowing up? Why me?
Comedian Sinbad says Pryor changed everything.
Richard was so real. It was the first album I bought, comedy album. I was playing it. My father, who's a preacher, was in the hallway. And my mother, who's a mother of the church, they were both cracking up. They said, "Who's that?" I said, "That's Richard Pryor." So he caught everybody.
By the 1990s, the TV industry was shifting. Networks and advertisers began recognizing the buying power of a growing black middle class. For the first time, black audiences weren't just being counted, they were being courted, and sitcoms became the perfect vehicle.
I know my parents love me.
A Different World proved comedy could tackle serious ideas.
You can't trust anybody in a uniform.
Gender, class, racism, without losing its audience. Since comedy has a way of lowering defenses while making a point, says Sinbad.
We're the ones you can bring in and talk about what's happening in the world, and we can bring it in a way that's funny, and somebody in the audience that might not even agree with the viewpoint. If you do it right, you can get somebody to go like, "Hey, okay, I see that side of it."
Sinbad says the sitcom worked because its showrunner at the time, Debbie Allen, trusted the actors to bring themselves to the work.
It saved me, because she would let me be me. Me to have something on the script, and it wasn't working, she said, "Sinbad, give me something." So to have that kind of trust and that kind of confidence, and when Debbie got there, I finally got some clothes that fit. You see, the first time I had those tight pants.
Oh man, so she had a conversation with the wardrobe department, I would imagine.
Yes.
Living Single captured the lives of young black professionals years before mainstream TV caught up.
So good to see a woman on the job.
It's good to be one.
Erica Alexander says the influence of her character, a high-powered attorney, still surprises her.
These amazing people started coming up to me saying they went into law, they went into executive positions, they went into education, leadership positions, because they were very inspired by Maxine Shaw, attorney at law. I knew that representation mattered, but there was proof positive. They had actually done the things that Maxine Shaw was purporting to have done.
Go on to my boy. Go put on your work clothes.
The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air presented a black family whose lives were shaped by affluence and aspiration.
How's your job going?
Karen Parsons played Hillary Banks, a character who could have become a one-note punchline, but became something far more enduring.
You know he likes you.
Oh, and I'm supposed to be nice to everyone who likes me? How much time do you think I have?
Well, I hear people a lot say, stuff about her being ditzy, and the younger generations didn't see her that way. They look at her as a role model because she went out there and she went after what she wanted, and she had no problem saying, "This is who I am, and I'm beautiful, and I'm going to do this," and no holding back, no trying to make nice for people or try to make people comfortable.
Did you feel the weight of representing a version of black life which at the time really contradicted so many dominant narratives?
No. I think at the time, for one thing, it was hard to comprehend that so many people were actually watching and that so many people would watch. Cosby Show was happening at the time, and they were kind of like the epitome of black family and family period, because it was the #1 show period. So we were kind of this, to me, it was kind of like this very odd cast of characters, strange, different, kind of all very different. All of these things that were actually very important, I would find later, I think, for representation. There were such different black characters, people.
Different voices, different visions of black life, airing the same week, sometimes even the same night. And that mattered because audiences were finally seeing a range of stories instead of just one.
I think up until that point, everybody was thinking about the weight of what it would mean and how we told those stories. But there was a specific freedom in maybe saying, well, we don't have to, because there's all sorts of different people telling the stories. There was just a feeling that the sky was the limit and that we were suddenly being supported. That's different when you're being funded and supported.
Supported, and for millions of viewers, that expanded what seemed possible.
I will tell you, my favorite interview was Sinbad. I have been chasing Sinbad for a decade for an interview, long before I had any conversation about this book, and it was because He taped a comedy special at Morehouse, and it was my dad's favorite comedy special, 1991, to the point where the VHS tape basically eroded and ripped in half. And he'd had a stroke and was reluctant to do TV interviews, but we got one for this. So here's the thing. In my day job, I read a lot of books, do a lot of book interviews, have moderated a lot of book talks. I wanted the book tour for this book to feel different and fun and not academic or boring. So I wanted to do a little test, make this interactive, get a sense of who's in the room. There is a show that I used to watch, and I'm sure you did, every week. And I would wait for the theme song. I would be there just when that theme song came on because I had to sing along to it. So we're going to play it, and I'm going to see if you all can sing along to this song. Okay? Here we go.
Now this is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down. And I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I became the prince of a town called Bel Air.
Me and that.
No.
Phil, thank you for being here. On short notice, too. When we realized that the ATL airport was going to do what it was going to do, Phil, you stepped in very quickly, so I appreciate that.
No, it's no problem. As you all know, Jeff is a member of WABJ, so we're here to, pop in. So, of course. So, this is great. Let me just see real quick. We'll take another test of who's in the room. Raise your hand if you are old enough to remember the first episode of In Living Color. Pretty good. Okay. I don't, unfortunately. Sorry about that. I don't think I am either. So sorry about that. But the 90s, I'm a 90s baby, of course. And so it was a special time, right? I mean, it was a special time. Can you tell us a little bit about what caused, how did this come about? All of these shows, Martin, A Different World, all of these awesome shows, how do they come to exist all at the same time?
See, this is why when you work in broadcasting, they tell you to silence your phone. And guess who didn't have their phone silenced? Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Thank you for the question.
No.
It was a business decision.
Yep.
So I interviewed Barry Diller. Barry Diller co-founded Fox Broadcasting Network. And what he told me was, he knew that when he launched Fox, that there had to be something different about it. And the differentiator was that the network was going to skew young and it was going to skew urban. We know what urban means. And he said that when he looked across the landscape of primetime television, what NBC, ABC, and CBS were putting on television was virtually indistinguishable in terms of sitcoms. And so word had gone out in Hollywood that there was this new network that was looking for different kinds of sitcom fare. And the first pilot he got, the title of it was Not the Cosby Show. That's how on the nose these producers were for this show, because they knew what Barry Diller was looking for, so they called it Not the Cosby Show. That show turned out to be Married with Children, this subversive, hilarious sitcom. And the success of that show led to The Simpsons, it led to Cops. Those of you who were around and watching TV, you know what was on Fox Broadcasting. And we should say, for those who weren't, when I say Fox Broadcasting, people think sometimes of Fox News. This was different. This was network television, Fox Broadcasting, right? So that created the formula for everything that came after. Keenen Ivory Wayans had just done I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker. Yeah. And that was what allowed him to have the agency, the funding, and a network executive who greenlit this show and then just backed out of the way and let him do what he wanted to do, effectively, at least in the first few seasons of that show. Keenen Ivory Wayans had to figure out how to build a pipeline for that show, because sketch comedy and television at that time, the talent pipeline was built around SNL. So he had to go out and find folks we now know, like David Alan Grier. Jamie Foxx came on in the third season. Jim Carrey. David Spade actually auditioned for In Living Color and said that when he saw Jim Carrey's audition, said, I'm not even sure why I'm here. Yeah. And then he put on all the funny members of his family. And so the book gets into, the In Living Color chapter is probably my favorite chapter of the book, because it starts with their family life and how it is that you have all of these siblings who are funny in their own way. And Keenen would talk about how his writer's room, he said it was not a democracy, it was very much a dictatorship. And you had to make him laugh if you wanted your sketch to get on that show, you had to make him laugh first. And he had a pretty high bar growing up in the kind of family that he did. And that's why that show, the second season of In Living Color, to my mind, is unmatched. I mean, every sketch just hit. Do you have a favorite sketch?
Homie, Don't Play That.
Homie, Don't Play That. That's a good one. Mine was, maybe it's because it reminded me of my aunts, but the Benita Bottrell. When the gossips who ain't heard that from me. Oh my goodness, that was a good one. And Men on Film, I guess it was Men on a bunch of different things. Yeah, exactly. David Alan Grier made the point that you could not do that these days. That people are so quick to be offended, and back then, if you were offended, you had to write a letter to the network. First of all, good luck finding out where to send the letter to.
Right.
And then, by the time it would be received and read, they had filmed all the episodes.
Yep.
And In Living Color, and then I'll stop. See, I told you it was my favorite chapter. The other thing that was important about In Living Color is what it meant for the TV industry. The Super Bowl halftime show exists as we know it because of In Living Color. Before the early 1990s, the networks that carried the Super Bowl would use the halftime show to promote whatever else they had coming up. So CBS used it in '91 to promote the Winter Olympics. So like marching bands, Brian Boitano was on the field. No disrespect to him, but can you imagine a Brian Boitano figure being a part of the Super Bowl, the halftime show, in the modern era? So In Living Color saw an opening, and what they did was they produced a 20-minute long special that they counter-programmed against what was on CBS. And if you go back and watch it on YouTube, what you see is Jim Carrey say, hey, look, if you're worried about going back to the game, don't worry about it. Here's a countdown clock, 20 minutes. By the time this is up, you can go back to the game. Well, 20 million people, more than 20 million people, did not go back to CBS. They stayed on Fox. And the very next year, CBS and the NFL said, we can't have that. And so they booked Michael Jackson for the halftime Super Bowl show. And that's how we get, Prince and Bad Bunny and everybody else. The thing that stands out to me about that story is the producer of that show, the Michael Jackson show, told me that Michael Jackson, God bless him, did not understand that he was the halftime entertainment. He thought it was football on the front end and the back end of his show, and he wanted to move it to nighttime because the lighting would be better, the pyrotechnics would be better, and he didn't understand why you just couldn't move this football game, if it was going to be a football game, to the night so his concert could be produced the way he wanted it to be produced.
People can't understand, like people younger than me might not understand the popularity that Michael Jackson,
Unbelievable.
at the time.
Unbelievable. But that all stemmed from that show. And the other thing that stands out to me about that era was, especially these days when people are creating content and chasing algorithms, this thought that you have to, in order to reach the biggest audience, you have to be as broad as possible in whatever it is that you're creating. That's not the lesson of the 90s. The lesson of the 90s is when you are specific and authentic and you are telling a story that resonates with you, there is universality in that. Because remember, I refer to these as black sitcoms because they were, but they were also the top-rated shows on television. So it meant that people were watching them no matter what the race, the region, background. It was funny television. It had to operate on that level. And of course, looking back 30, 40 years later, the question is, what was the cultural impact and import of all of that? And that's what is spelled out in the book.
Yeah, I think there are two people that I have to mention when you bring that up, and that's David Alan Grier, a Detroiter. Obviously, for any Detroiters, okay, we got some Detroiter here. And also, Keenan Ivory Wayans, a brother of Alpha Alpha. Obviously got to mess with you. He's a Kappa. It's okay.
That's okay.
One thing that I'm curious for you to answer from the book is that you explain this dynamic of mirrors for some and windows for others, right? Can you talk about that dynamic and explain it for us?
Well, right. So those shows were mirrors in the sense that if you were, as I was, 10 years old watching In Living Color, or 12 years old watching Martin, or watching A Different World, my brother had gone to Morehouse. I knew I was probably going to go to Morehouse too. I wouldn't say it out loud, but I would watch that show and think, well, if I do go, it could be like this. And you get to play that out in your mind's eye. And so for us, those shows were mirrors. And that was important. But just as important was the fact that they were windows for other people. So you were getting access to the lives, the aspiration, just normal moments, the hijinks, in some cases, as in the case of Martin, from your, well, fictionally from your hometown of Detroit. And those were important windows, access points for people. It really softens the distance between us, right? And so the other thing, the point I make in this book is that these shows were important because they pushed the culture forward. We've seen just in the last 2 years how affirmative action policy and diversity policy has been rolled back. Politics is important, policy is important, it is important infrastructure that creates access, but there is a durability to cultural change that is much harder to unwind. And that's one of the takeaways here too. I did tell you that we recorded this interview with Daryl Bell, and I do want to get to it, just to be a good steward of our time. So we're going to take a quick break, watch that interview, and then we'll come back and talk on the other side.
Let's do it.
All right.
Daryl Bell, it's great to see you. I appreciate you always making time. You were the first actor to speak with me. This was years ago when I was writing the book, so it's great to speak with you now. We should say you're in Atlanta for 2 reasons. One, because of the travel nightmare in the Atlanta airport right now, but you were in Atlanta before all that started, filming a reboot of A Different World for Netflix.
That's right, Jeff. It is so good to see you. And yes, we are here on the very public yet Netflix top secret reboot of A Different World. So it's good to join you from Atlanta. And it is so cool because today specifically, we're shooting on location at Clark Atlanta. And it is exactly in front of the Clark Atlanta building, which was the first shot for School Days.
That's right. That's right.
So
I remember it well.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a top secret reboot. So there's not much you can tell us about it.
Other than it's happening,
Okay.
yeah. I can tell you what most folks should know, which is we're going to certainly catch up with the original characters. So myself, Kadeem Hardison, Jasmine Guy, and Cree Summer are all back. And you will see some other cast join. I think it's already been public that Jada Pinkett Smith has reprised her role as Lena. And Dwayne and Whitley have a daughter who is coming to Hillman, played by the amazing Malia Joy Moon. And Ron has a son who's a star quarterback who is joining Hillman, and that gentleman's name is Cornell Young, and they are leading this really good, phenomenal group of young artists who are playing the next generation of Hillman students. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. What's it like being reunited with your cast and filming again?
Well, it's been great. One of the benefits that we have is while we've been out doing the A Different World tour, we've all been back together. And that had been so amazing because all of us felt the same chemistry that we did when we were on set together. And part of the joy of all that was for decades, we have all thought a reboot is never going to happen. And the tour was taking place before any of this really came to fruition. So now for all of us to be back on set and to put these characters back on and to have, new stories for them, it's really been spectacular. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's nostalgic and fresh and all that wrapped in one.
Yeah. Well, take us back to the beginning. How did you first land on A Different World, and what do you remember about that audition process?
So for me, let me try to give you the shortest version of the story. It was the original casting of Dwayne Wayne came down to myself, Kadeem, and one other actor. We had all auditioned for A Different World, and this was after we had shot School Days. So Kadeem and I were already really close at that time, and Kadeem ended up booking the role. It's a long story, but School Days was my first job, and I had only auditioned for Eileen Knight, Spike Lee, and Robbie Reed. When I had to go to network for NBC for this role back in the day, when I walked into the room, Kadeem went first, and all we heard was uproarious laughter outside the room with Kadeem. I walked in the door, there were 40 people in the room. 40 people, and I hadn't seen that many people, and not only was it a room filled with folks, but they were all looking at me like, make me laugh. I was like, seriously?
Right.
Worst audition of my life. So Kadeem gets the job, but he lived in New York. So coming to LA, he said, I don't have a place to stay, so he moved in with me. So I had to, and Kadeem is a native New Yorker, so he didn't know how to drive and didn't have a driver's license. So I had to take Kadeem to work every day to the job I didn't get.
Wow.
And if Kadeem was here, he would tell you, and you had to bring me home too. I had to do both. So it wasn't until midway through the first season that they cast an under 5 role that I did, and I had come back for a couple of smaller roles, but then there was an episode where Dwayne was going to try to date an upperclassman, and they wanted to cast Dwayne's best friend. Marcy Carsey of Carsey Warner said that she was unfamiliar with my work, so she wanted to have open auditions. So I had already been in 3 or 4 episodes, but I had to audition to get the role back. And it was so funny because at the time, the hat, glasses, the mustache, all of this went out in the breakdown. And I was like, it's me, and everybody else came in to audition. It was so funny.
And you were already friends with Kadeem.
Yes. And he's living with me, and I'm bringing him to work every day. And so they said, we need someone to play his best friend. And when I went into the audition, it was the director, Ellen Falcon, Robbie Reed, Marcy Carsey, and Kadeem. And I was the last one to come in. And our chemistry was what it is. So we were great together. And I finished and I said, okay, I'll be outside waiting to take you home whenever you're done. So, that was it. And that's how I got cast in that role. And that is how the first season came together. That's the short story.
You weren't just playing a character. We all now know that you and the other actors on that show were helping define what a black college experience looked like on television. When did you realize that what you were doing was something more impactful, something deeper, something bigger than just a sitcom?
Interesting. So most of the cast, when they're asked that question, will tell you they weren't really thinking about that. For me, all of us knew this was a spinoff of The Cosby Show, which at the time was the biggest thing on the planet. So this was a big job. But for that, in that first season, while other cast members will tell you we were just trying to figure out what our roles were, I was an economics major. I was thinking about business and all that. So this was, the entertainment part was secondary for me. I remember the morning after we debuted on television and I was on set. This is when there were no cell phones. Someone called down to the stage, script supervisor hung up the phone and she said, we got a 50 share yesterday. And it was just, everyone was blown away at how big the ratings were. And I knew it was special then. The first season, while it had, not unlike many series in their first season, was trying to find its footing. We had some new characters. Jasmine Kadeem and I were added in after Lisa Bonet, Dawn Lewis, and Marissa Tomei. So we all had to kind of find our footing together. But it wasn't really until season 2 when Debbie Allen came on board, a Howard HU, alum, where it was time for us to really portray what an HBCU experience is like. And that's when everything changed dramatically. And the impact that we had from that second season on, specifically representing the story history of HBCUs and fraternities and sororities and groundbreaking education, that's when we knew we were making a difference. And look, the numbers are always somewhat unclear to me, but it was at least double, if not tripled, enrollment for HBCUs while A Different World was running in prime time. That's how impactful it is. And it's so amazing now to find here in 2026, people still will, not a day goes by that someone doesn't say, I went to college, or I went to an HBCU, or I'm a professor, or I'm an HBCU president because I watched A Different World. And it's the most gratifying thing that any of us experience who are a part of this show.
One of the things that I came away with in writing this book is that what made the 90s and 90s black sitcoms in particular so important was that each of those shows, in their own way, they were specific, they were authentic, they were true to whatever experience they were trying to convey. And as a result of that, there was universal appeal. So I say all that to say, A Different World, yes, it was set at this fictional HBCU, but it was also a top-rated show, which meant that tens of millions of people were watching it week after week. I mean, what do you think about that? And what was it like to exist in that ecosystem back in the 90s?
It's really interesting that you asked that question, because now our industry and metrics are so bifurcated. And so you will find that someone will say, well, this is the #1 drama out. Well, this is the #1 comedy. This is the #1 procedural. We were the #2 show on all of television. And while we super served the African American community, we were the #2 show behind Cosby with African Americans. We were the #2 show on all of America. And you don't get that number without the crossover appeal of all of America. You don't get 25 million viewers without all of America. So it's important to know, or important to understand, on one hand, when you're that successful that early, right? It's rare that there were, if we look at many of the shows that were on after us, all of which you know, Cheers, 60 Minutes, LA Law, all of these, mega hits and groundbreaking shows, he beat them all, right? And I remember one of the things that for those who thought A Different World was only successful because it followed The Cosby Show, there are a lot of people who thought, well, A Different World is just a time slot hit. I'm the one that always has the metrics available. So we were only the second show in the history of television to premiere and finish the season at #2 behind Bewitched. In the 5 seasons that we were on, we finished 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and the 4th season is important because we went from 5th to 4th. In our 4th season, we beat The Cosby Show. And there was one episode, and particularly now, it is impactful because at the time, George H. Bush had issued an ultimatum to Saddam Hussein about the necessity to comply with the U.S. requirements or there would be grave consequences. Our show airs on a Thursday night, and at 8 o'clock, there was an episode where Blair Underwood was the guest star, and there's a scene where Blair Underwood's character is about to go off to fight in the war. And he has this very emotional scene with Glenn Turman playing Colonel Taylor. That episode ended up #1 that week. It was the one time we were the #1 show on all of television. And at midnight, America went to war with Iraq in the first Iran war. I'm sorry, the first Iraqi war. And that episode was written by Dominic Hoffman and Jasmine Guy. So it was a really interesting time for, all of us in our 20s, where some people go their entire career and can never say I was on the #1 show on all of television. And we had that experience, if not for that 1 week. But it was also important to us because now we were succeeding on our own merit, not just because we were a time slot hit.
Yeah. There's a story about Thurgood Marshall you told me that I wonder if you can share here.
Yeah, it's really fun. There was an episode where a building was named after Thurgood Marshall. And our show tapes we taped on Fridays. There's a 4:30 show and a 7 p.m. show. And right before we go to the 4:30 show, the line producer, Joanne Curley, said, did anyone clear Thurgood Marshall's name? And they said, no. It was like, oh my gosh, we're about to shoot this. So,
and that means you have to have permission to use his name on TV.
That's correct. So she called his office. And for those of us in the community, they will understand immediately when, we're just going to say, Miss Ethel answered the phone. And Miss Ethel said, hello. And they said, listen, my name is Joanne Curley. I'm calling from the set of A Different World. We need to Justice Thomas's permission. She said, well, now you're going to have to write a letter. And when we receive your letter, give us 6 weeks. She said, no. We're shooting this in a half hour. We need to know now. She said, okay, hold on. Comes back to the phone. She says, I spoke with Justice Marshall. Justice Marshall said he does not believe you are required, nor should you be, to ask for my permission to use my name. And I wish you continued success with your television series. And with that, she hangs up the phone, runs into the producer's room, and says, we got clearance. I said, by who? By Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Thank you very much. And that's how we got to use his name.
Oh, man. Daryl Bell, always a delight. Thank you for making time. And beyond that, thank you for your work. Thank you for pushing the culture forward. Thank you for the care and the responsibility and the level of intention with which you put good work out into the world. We deeply appreciate it.
Jeff, I can only say thank you. The feeling is mutual. I can only say thank you for not only the work that you do, but being someone who is adhering to and continuing to utilize journalism and the ethics and the commitment to the work of journalism and the standards that you hold. It is not easy, and what you do and other journalists like you in the current environment is it is necessary, and thank you for all of that hard work.
Well, thank you, brother. I accept those words on behalf of all of us who are called to do this work. So thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you in person in D.C. when I can get there. I'm sorry I can't be there tonight, but we are here together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Be well and give my best to everybody on the A Different World reboot set. Can't wait to see it.
I look forward, and I will do that. Thank you, sir.
When you heard him say that Jasmine Guy wrote that episode that was top rated, that was because Debbie Allen had, let me back up. The first season of A Different World was unlike the rest of it, and it was because it was not written by, let's just be honest, black folks. It wasn't. Phylicia Rashad realized it wasn't going to work, and so she says to Bill Cosby, you have a problem on this set, and you need to fix it, and the person to fix it is my sister, Debbie Allen. Debbie Allen comes on board in the second season, overhauls the entire thing, down to the set dressing. So she went into, remember the pit where they would gather? And she looked at the tables and would say, there's no hot sauce on these tables. This isn't an HBCU. Where's the... So little details like that. But she had, the cast members have written into their contract that they would have experience directing and writing. Because she told them, this could be as good as it's going to get for you in your career, so get all the experience that you can get on this set. And in many cases, she was right. And that's also in the book, that for so many of these actors, even though they were on these top-rated shows, the way Erika Alexander explained it, Hollywood was not ready to absorb them. That word absorb just hit me like a ton of bricks. Hollywood wasn't ready to absorb them when those shows were over. And so for many of them, they were auditioning alongside people who had grown up watching those shows. So that's in the book, too.
There's a name that you just brought up who's been in the news quite a bit himself. Bill Cosby.
Yeah.
And you have a chapter in the book about Bill Cosby. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for this book, you cannot tell the story of 90 sitcoms without talking about Bill Cosby's work. You can't not talk about The Cosby Show. It was impactful. It was key to everything that followed. And so what I do is I divorce the art from the man. And to talk about Bill Cosby, you have to hold two truths at once. He was a brilliant comic. The work that he did mattered, not just on The Cosby Show, but I Spy. The fact that he was intentional about being a clean comic and a respectable comic at that point in time when he was doing it was important. And yet, what he is accused of and what he served time for is monstrous. It absolutely is. And so I reckon with all of that in the book and ask the reader to answer that question for themselves.
And also going back to Martin, too, one of my favorite shows for obvious reasons. Yeah. Can you talk about Martin and its lasting power? Like people still talking, still have quotes, still talk about Bro-Man from the floor.
Think of all the catchphrases that came off of that show. Yeah. You so crazy, you go girl, was up, was up, was up. I mean, it again, talking about the durability of culture. But there was a physical comedy in that show. There was a frenetic, like a comedic performance. I don't know how he did it. To do that week after week was just phenomenal. But let's not forget, the other thing on that show, Gina was a high-powered marketing executive, and he was a successful Detroit disc jockey. So even there, you saw, even though that show had Shanae and Otis and Roman and all that stuff, at the heart, I mean, that show had heart. And so it was just comedic genius on every level.
We're in a very fragmented media landscape right now. So algorithmic driven, it's a mess. And trust me, I know. I'm on social media all the time.
We follow you. We know. Yeah.
So what do you think we've lost from that collective 90s experience?
We've lost the shared reference points. There is no monoculture anymore. Everybody's in their own silos. Everyone's watching their own thing. There are 8 billion people on the planet. There are probably 8 billion cell phones. There are probably 8 billion versions of stories that people have uploaded. And so what we are missing is this sense of sitting down in your living room with your family as tens of millions of other families are doing the same thing. And the next day you go to school or to work and you have those conversations about what you saw. Or there's a joke that you tell and the other person can finish the line because they saw it too. One of the things that just resonates with me is that the night after Criss Cross performed on In Living Color, all the kids in my school, and I went to a diverse high school, middle school at the time, came in with their clothes on backwards. And it was because Criss Cross had performed on In Living Color the previous night.
We cannot explain that today. Can't explain that. Can't explain it.
Not at all. I'm like, look at Kelly Doherty with her whole outfit on backwards.
Yep.
But that happened back then. And so there is you lose the sense of cultural cohesion when people aren't talking to each other and they're not watching the same thing, having that same language. And so that's what we're missing.
And so when you look at today's TV and things that are happening, where do you see the fingerprints of the 90s in today's television landscape?
It's funny, and this is actually, do I have it in the book? There is a baton passing that happens in our culture, and this certainly happens in comedy. And so to your question about where do you see the DNA, you see it with Quinta Brunson. When Quinta Brunson got her development deal with ABC, who did she turn to? She turns to Larry Wilmore, because Larry Wilmore had experience launching shows. He got his start in the writer's room. He worked with Paul Mooney and got his start in the writer's room, he told me, with In Living Color. And remember that whole thing I was telling you about how Kenan said it wasn't a democracy, it was a dictatorship, you had to be good? Well, Larry Wilmore learned how to be good working for Kenan, and when Issa Rae got her HBO development deal, she turned to him. When Quinta Brunson got her deal, she turned to him. And those are incredibly impactful shows. But even before that, I write in this book about the lineage of black comedy. So it says, Jamie Foxx named himself in tribute to Red Fox. Arsenio Hall gave Chris Rock his big break, which led to SNL. Arsenio also mentored Will Smith, paving the way for The Fresh Prince, and shared a screen with Eddie Murphy in Coming to America. That movie featured John Amos, who'd starred in Good Times, and a then unknown Samuel L. Jackson. Every laugh line, every one-liner, every moment of primetime brilliance was connected by a thread of legacy. And so that's what I discovered when I did the research, starting with the 90s and then tracking backwards. It's remarkable. It's remarkable.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we have some time for questions. Is that it?
Yes.
I think we have
we're going to open it up to questions, and then we'll go upstairs, and there's a gathering and some book signing.
Oh, yeah. We'll have a gathering on the 5th floor, but we'll have some questions first. Oh, okay, we have.
Oh, sure. Yeah, my name is J. Rick. Thank you for this experience. This was really nostalgic. I'm just curious, in terms of the next generational impact. Clearly a lot of us were introduced to HBCU culture and a lot of nuances. What do you think with, I guess, the shows now, what kind of generational cultural impact is going to happen? And do you think that these platforms now are giving a lot of exposure to young actors that we'll kind of talk about in the future? Because when I think about Fresh Prince, I think about every girl that Will had on that show ended up becoming big, later. So are we creating those platforms for young actors?
There was somebody who read the book who accused me of romanticizing the 90s, and I said, guilty as charged. There is something to be said for gatekeeping. What we've gained is the democratizing of content creation, which is terrific. You have a story to tell, you can tell it. But there is something to be gained by honing your craft and being a young writer who goes into a room with 15 other writers and has to workshop a joke and has to understand what that's like. You mentioned the guest stars on those 90 sitcoms. Okay, so fine, if you're not a writer, if you're a casting agent, learning the craft and coming up through an established process, and there being a gatekeeper who says, no, that's not good enough, and you have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to do it. I feel like that's what gets lost in this moment of everybody being able to do everything, and they can call themselves whatever they want. So I can pick up my phone and say whatever I want, talk direct to camera, upload it, and all of a sudden I'm a journalist? No, you're not. You're somebody talking to your phone. So that's thank you. That's what I think we've lost. I don't know what that means for the next generation. That might be the next book. I don't know. But I do know that in 30 years, are you going to have the next version of us talking about what they watched on TikTok? I don't think so, because it doesn't resonate that way. But thank you for the question. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't see you.
Hi, Mikhail Ramos. Congratulations to you and your book. Hey, Phil, how you doing? This is more of a statement, but as a sports journalist in the room, the ties to that halftime show, 1992, if Washingtonian in the building, we won the Super Bowl, so shout out to that.
There you go. Thank you.
Joe Theismann, shout out to everybody.
I am probably as happy about this book as you are. I heard you on WNYC yesterday.
Oh, terrific. Thank you.
And I actually...
You didn't come down from New York, did you? Or you just happened to hear it?
Former New Yorkers still listen to WNYC.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And I actually texted in a comment that I'm going to comment, and I want you to kind of elaborate on it. When I was growing up, my mother and her brothers used to crack up over Sanford and Son. For me as a kid, he was just some old guy who my mother and her sisters and brothers were cracking up over. And years later, I learned about the Chitlin Circuit and how he came through that. Would you kind of talk a little bit about the through line for that era of comics and how they impacted this era?
Yeah, Moms Mabley, who was doing social commentary before anybody had a language for it. Red Fox, who you mentioned. The other thing about Red Fox, I did not know, gosh, okay. Did you know that Red Fox and Malcolm X were friends? Yes. Okay, I didn't know that. One was known as Chicago Red, the other was Detroit Red, because they both had red hair. One was from Chicago.
I know y'all read the autobiography. Yeah.
What you see with those shows, though, is the institutionalizing of that kind of humor. And Sanford and Son, as Erica Alexander said, Sanford and Son and Good Times, those were sitcoms with black people on them. They were not necessarily black sitcoms in the sense that they weren't developed by black folks and they weren't written by black folks. But what stands out to me in watching those shows is that's where you start to see black comedy without apology. And he starts to open the door a little bit. And you start to see the authenticity, and he's performing for an audience, not caring what that audience thinks of him. Whereas like a Bill Cosby, for instance, or even early Dick Gregory, cared how those jokes landed, and they cared about how not just they were perceived, but the race was perceived because they had to care. And that's one of the reasons why the book is called Black Out Loud. It's a play on Laugh Out Loud, but what it speaks to is you get to this point where the comedians and the performers stop performing inside other people's expectations and start doing it on their own, out loud and in full color. But that starts with certainly, in the beginnings of black comedic performance in this country, which is vaudeville and minstrelsy and the Chitlin Circuit. So thank you for the question. Mr. Detro. Oh, you don't have a microphone. Yeah. But you're a radio guy. You can project.
Okay.
Oh. Yep. I'm working at a deficit here because I can't really see.
Right here.
Oh, here you go.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Solomon Goins. I am a freshman student journalist with Howard University News Service.
Oh, terrific.
You know. And my question is just How would you describe the shift from, if you will, like minstrelsy or like people acting as minstrels and just a very dehumanizing way of acting for Black people in the early 1900s to shows where it's the Black middle class and Black people are just depicted in a way that is more true to reality?
Well, you had about a 40 to 50 year span there. And so one of the things I try to do with the book is to apply a lens that is appropriate for the time and not try to judge a Billy Kersands or a Burt Williams or a Hattie McDaniel by a modern standard. Hattie McDaniel used to say, "I'd rather play a maid than be one." And of course, she was the first Black person to win an Oscar, but guess what? She couldn't go to the awards ceremony, and she couldn't go to the premiere of Gone with the Wind. She had to go, I think she had to go through the back door if she was allowed to be there at all. And so, but it was that kind of work. And even, Burt Williams, yes, what they were doing was degrading, it was dehumanizing. It was all they were allowed to do. But even in some of that work, if you go back and watch it, you could see, if you know what to look for, you can see ways where they were trying to infuse some humanity and dignity into that work. But imagine if you were called to be a performer, and you had a gift, and you were a comic, but you just happened to be born in 1896, or but you wanted to work in that field. What would you do? You did what you were only allowed to do, and at that time you did what white audiences would pay to see, and that was exaggerated physical humor, stereotype stuff. I don't need to explain it because I'm sure you've seen it. But that is where the book starts, because as I was doing the research, you go back and you go back and you go back, and then you land at the origin, and that's where it starts.
And I learned about Billy Kersands in this book, and Billy Kersands was one of the first sort of, what would you say, I guess, comedians to really get a national audience in that way, and that was a really interesting part of your book.
And was rich as a result. I mean, for his time. Yeah, we got time for about one or two more questions.
Hello. When you talk about romanticizing the 90s, I'm here with you, and I think when you talk about crossover appeal for these shows, I watched every single one of these shows as well. I think my parents at times tried to make me not watch In Living Color, and I absolutely watched it anyway, but I'm thinking about you are writing this book as somebody who loved these shows as a kid, who they formed a key part of your identity. You're also approaching it as a clear-eyed journalist 30 years later, and I'm wondering what for you was the trickiest part. Is there anything that you're looking back and you're like, 30 years later, this plays differently, I know a lot more? I think with the exception of what you talked about, the split between Bill Cosby, the performer, and what we know about Bill Cosby now, I'm wondering, was there anything that you really had to struggle with or think through or think like, as I research and write this book 30 years later, I'm thinking about it a lot differently as I did experiencing this in the 90s?
Yeah, so I always thought, well, why did this era, and Scott, thank you for the question. I always thought, why did this era end? And the answer you usually get is because the advent of reality television, which was cheaper to produce. That's half the story. The real story is the same business decision that gave way to the explosion of the 90s, which was the pursuit of Black disposable income, and Black folks were overrepresented in terms of TV viewing, and that showed up in the data. And this decision that it was worth it to take the creative risk to give a show to Martin and Keenan. There was a similar business decision that brought about a pivot, and it was the networks and the advertisers that spend money on those networks deciding that, yes, we've built these shows, and Fox exists, and UPN and WB, and they've all been built off the, not even backs, but the eyeballs of the Black viewer. We want to pivot and find a different demographic. And when they did that, they pivoted into a white demographic, and you see the ends of all those shows, and you get like a Dawson's Creek where there is not a single Black character. And that's essentially what did it. And in Hollywood, it's like success begets success. So the pivot happens, there are all these other shows that are highly rated, and then that's just a domino effect. And so reporting all of that out was interesting because it was, I had a sense that was the case, but it showed up in the research and in the conversations I was having with a lot of the showrunners and performers connected to them. Add to that the fact that Karen Parsons told me, she couldn't get work because everyone said, She would go to auditions and they'd say, well, you're Hillary Banks. Everyone knows you're Hillary Banks. Same thing with Alfonso Ribeiro or Jaleel White. All of these incredible, like legendary sitcom actors got typecast, or if they weren't entirely typecast, there was always a reason why they couldn't do another project. And so that's part of this story too. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Wendy Ellis, a reformed journalist. But I want to pivot back to a point that you made earlier about almost what was lost with regard to the communal nature of consuming the shows. But I also see that there's actually this long tail that without that, we wouldn't be where we are today. I think about what was happening at the time of these shows that I grew up watching in Living Color and such. But it was also happening when we were also telling our stories on the big screen. John Singleton, Lee Daniels, those types of stories. And what it did was actually train this pipeline of Black storytellers, directors of photography. My oldest son is in the business now because of that pipeline that was actually built in the 90s. And so, and you think about people like Erica Alexander, she's been a force not necessarily in front of the camera, but behind the camera.
That's right, yeah.
And so when we think about what is really the legacy of being Black out loud, throughout all of this is the control of telling our stories, not just the opportunity to be in front of the camera, but behind the camera. And is that the next story? Is that the next part of this legacy as far as Black storytelling is concerned?
Thank you for saying that. Because when I was writing this book, I was hoping that this would resonate in the way that you just expressed it. And yes, if you look across the footprint of the 90s, it wasn't just television. I happened to work in television, so I was focused on that, and for me that was formative and impactful. But 90s R&B is unmatched. That's why we were playing it when you all walked in. 90s fashion, Carl Kanai, Cross Colors, Aniche, the list goes on. 90s film, as you mentioned. Eddie Murphy and later Will Smith and, of course, Martin Lawrence were the box office stars. 90s literature. Oprah on television. Like, you could just, the list goes on and on and on. The Black cultural output in that era was unmatched. I don't know how we get back to it. I don't think we ever probably can because the economics of it don't exist. But you also have to look at what else was happening. It was the end of the Cold War, the Black middle class was growing. So there's an economic story there, there's a policy story. But I think the takeaway for me is that when Black creators have the access and the agency and the funding, you get what is captured in this book. You get really the golden age of, well, in this case, television. So thank you all for your interest and your support.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Round of applause.